Hiya folks, Gord Pizer here. You know, if you read last week's blog, I was talking about the phenomenal lake trout opportunities in Ontario. You know, everywhere from Lake Simcoe in southern Ontario up into the northeast part of the province, places like Lake Temagami, world famous. And then you come across the north shore of Lake Huron, around the Sault Ste. Marie area, up towards Wawa and White River, that north shore of Lake Superior, absolutely incredible. Same thing around Thunder Bay on Lake Superior. One of my favorite spots to go is actually Thunder Bay proper, Thunder Bay itself, right on Superior. It's got amazingly good lake trout. And then right into northwest Ontario here into Sunset Country, where we have the largest concentration of lake trout lakes found anywhere in the world, right here in northwest Ontario. And you know, if you read last week's blog, I talked about there's really one bait that stands out. It's the gold standard. If you ice fish for lake trout, you want to be fishing with a white tube jig, a white or a silver, anything that looks like a Cisco or an emerald shine, or it looks like a small bait fish in the water. These tube jigs are the gold standard. But here's the point. You're allowed 2 rods when you ice fish in Ontario, and you should always take advantage of those 2 rods, and you should always do something different on that second rod versus the first. So tube jig is the first bait, but there are some alternative lake trout strategies, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now and show you a couple of baits that you need to have on that second rod when you're ice fishing. Now, here's the first lure you need to have tied on, and that's a spoon. This happens to be a Williams ice jig. They call it a nice jig, even though it's a spoon. And if you've read the blog to this point, you know that I wrote about how my snow machine one day caught a limit of trout. That's back in the days when it was a 3 trout limit. It caught a limit of 12 to 15 pound trout. And I didn't catch a fish, and this is what my snow machine was using. This bait right here. Now, Williams whitefish spoon. The reason I really like the Williams spoons, they were originally from southern Ontario, from the Fort Erie country. They're almost 100 years old now. They're owned by Breck's in Sherbrooke, Quebec, 100% Canadian company. But here's the amazing thing about these spoons. They're made with jewelry quality gold and silver. So when you jig these, even in 30, 40, 80, 90, 100 plus feet of water, they catch a little bit of sunlight, and it just looks like an emerald shiner or a Cisco or a herring, tullaby, whatever you want to call it. It looks like a bait fish fluttering in the water. The other thing I think they look like, sometimes it looks like a small lake trout moving in. Whatever the reason, it calls the fish in, and these spoons are absolutely deadly. What you like to do is rip them up fairly aggressively and then let them flutter down on their own, and always pause. Now, you'll notice right here what I've done on this Williams spoon. I've taken the treble hook off, and what I like to do is put what's called a fast attach clip in between the treble hook and the spoon itself. And the reason for that is I can then take the treble very easily, make one twist, and take the treble off. Then I clip the head of a small emerald shiner or a small Cisco, and I clip the head off and I put it right through. I actually open up the mouth of the bait fish and put it right through, and then I reattach it to the spoon, and I can do it that quickly. And now I've got scent, I've got something else for the fish, the trout, to focus in on, and it makes a deadly bait that much deadlier. So first alternative, a spoon like the Williams ice jig. They call it an ice jig, but it's a spoon, and you want to have one of these tied on. Now here's number 2. Now the second bait you want to have, believe it or not, is a lipless crankbait. And these are the very same lures you use for smallmouth bass in the open water season. A lipless crankbait for lake trout is absolutely deadly. And there's just something about these baits when you vertically jig them, you lift them up, and they wobble, wobble. And if you listen carefully, they've got rattles inside. So it's the sound and vibration, it's the movement in that ultra clear northern Ontario lake trout water. They see that bait wobbling like that, they hear it, and they come rushing over to take a look at it. And then as it falls down, they come roaring in. And the key with these baits, what I like to do actually, is take it away from the fish. So when I've got my hummingbird on the ice here and I see a big lake trout come in and I've jigged up and it's come in, now it's looking at my lipless crankbait, I actually start to reel it away. I'll pull it away from the fish. Not really quickly, but quickly enough to make it look like it's a panicking minnow or a panicking herring or a panicking baitfish trying to get away. And at the same time now it's shaking and it's making that vibrating noise, and you can hear the rattles in it. And then as that trout picks up speed, I'll actually slow down just a little bit so it can overtake the bait. And just when I think it's going to overtake it, I actually stop and it opens its mouth and it absolutely inhales these things. Now, we've tried them all, and there seem to be two lipless cranks that excel better than most. One is the Rapala clack and wrap. Something about that sound and vibration of the clack and wrap. And the other thing the clacking wrap does really, really well is after you've lifted it up and then let it pause, unlike the others that tend to fall nose first, the clack and wrap tends to fall horizontally. And it's a deadly bait for lake trout. The other one is this bait made by Live Target. And this happens to be one of the new yearling series, and I'll tell you why we love this bait. We had this one out a couple of weeks ago, my grandson and I, and if you look really carefully, what's molded in, it looks actually like a school of baitfish, and it's molded right into the lipless crank. And what we've discovered with this bait is as we take it away from the trout, as we take it away and the trout comes roaring in, you can actually stop the bait. Stop it, and the trout will look at it, and you just barely shake, 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 and it looks like a school of minnows, a small, tightly clustered school of minnows. And believe it or not, even without even moving this bait, they tend to want to hit it. They come right in, open up their mouths, and they crush it. And I was amazed how hard they're hitting this and how well we're getting them hooked on. So, second bait, a lipless crankbait. Alrighty, the third bait that you need for lake trout when you're fishing for them in the wintertime in northern Ontario is a swim bait, a soft plastic swim bait like the one I've got here. Now, I've actually got this tied on one of the Perfect Jig hooks, so it's got a nice skirt on it, and this happens to be an Angler's Choice swim bait. A small 3.5, 4-inch size swim bait is absolutely ideal. And the neat thing about swim baits, it's the only three-dimensional bait. So when you put a swim bait in the water, and what I mean by three-dimensional is when you lift it up and let it fall, what a swim bait does, it actually rocks side to side. So as you're pulling it through the water, it's doing that. But because of the paddle tail at the back, it's kicking this way. So it's the only bait in existence when you fish it is actually three-dimensional, going in three different directions. So it's going side to side, coming up, falling down, and the tail is kicking the other way. It is deadly, absolutely deadly for lake trout. And here's a deadlier system yet. As good as this is, there's a way to improve it. And the way you improve it is, and this happens to be another slightly different style jig head. This happens to be one made by the Freedom Lure Company, and this happens to be a Hydra head. And the neat thing with this is you can attach any hook you want. It slides off, just like I was showing you on the Fast Hatch clip. So it lets you put any hook that you want on. And because the hook and the head are separate, the hook is doing one thing and the bait is really wobbling, really, really enticing. So you put that on a swim bait. This happens to be a bass magnet shifter shad on the back of this one, another deadly swim bait. And you put that down for lake trout, they can't resist hitting it. But here's how you make these baits even better. About 12 to 18 inches up your line, splice in a firefly spinner. And this just happens to be, it's actually a bait made for speckled trout, a firefly, a Williams Firefly spinner rig. And it's nothing more than a couple of spinners like that. But what it does, it makes it look like a school of bait fish, and here's this slightly bigger bait fish chasing after the school. So now when you lift that up and let it fall, the gold and the silver, you can get these in many, many different colors. The gold and the silver are reflecting light and they're flashing like a school of minnows. And here comes your swim bait chasing in behind. And there's one thing a lake trout can't comprehend and it can't stand. and that is competition. So when it sees this swim bait chasing after that school of minnows, it rushes in, and all you got to do is keep reeling, reel it up to the surface. That lake trout chases after, slow down ever so slightly, boom, and you got a big lake trout, maybe the trophy of a lifetime on. Fourth and final lure that you need to put on when you go lake trout fishing in northern Ontario, and this is it. Now, the fourth bait are these jigging wraps. This happens to be one of the brand new ones. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's actually called a snap wrap. And what it's got is it's got almost like a canopy here. So the minute you move this, it is totally erratic. You can't actually, when you're vertically jigging, you can't control what this bait's doing. It's just swimming everywhere under the water. And again, it looks like a panicking bait fish under the ice. And it looks like when you're jigging it like this, and then you pause, it looks like that bait fish has seen the big lake trout. Anytime a lake trout comes near, it thinks, oh, I've been seen, and this bait is panicking. It's trying to get away. Absolute turn on. Deadly, deadly bait. And the interesting thing is, believe it or not, the snap wrap was not made for ice fishing. It was actually made for the open water season, and it was made for walleye of all things. What we like to do is throw them behind the boat, and we'll troll along a contour, and we'll snap it, and then it falls back. Snap it, and let it fall back. Deadly system for walleye. But you put this on in the wintertime, and you vertical jig it for lake trout, lights out again. The other thing I like to do is I'll often take one of those fast attach clips. I'll remove the treble hook here. I'll put the fast attach clip on, and I'll put the treble back on the clip so it's a little bit below it, and then I'll put a minnow head on. And that little bit of minnow head is a bit of scent, and again, it's something for the lake trout to focus in on. So those are the baits you need to take with you. By all means, always have a white or a silver exude or any of the tube jigs, a Trigger X, the scented tubes. They're absolutely wonderful. But again, you're allowed 2 rods, so put one of these other baits on your second rod and then simply walk back and forth. Jig one for 5 minutes, put the rod down, come back to the other one, jig it for 5 minutes, put it down, keep walking back and forth between your holes. I guarantee these are the only 5 baits you ever need to use in northern Ontario to catch the lake trout of a lifetime.